Jake Morrison stood at the center of the bridge watching the red glow grow bigger through the main screen. The enemy ships looked like drops of blood floating in the black space around the human colony of New Portland. He had seen this sight too many times before, and each time it meant death for his people. The year was 2387, and humanity had been running from two alien armies for 12 long years. The Crimson Dominion came from the far edge of the galaxy, with ships that glowed red like fire and weapons that could melt through the strongest human armor like it was made of paper. The Nova Arbiters were worse in their own way, because they believed they had the right to judge every species in the galaxy, and they had decided that humans were too dangerous to live among the stars. Amy Carter turned from her station with worry written across her face. She was the best weapons officer Jake had ever worked with, but even she looked scared as she read the incoming messages. The Crimson Fleet was demanding that all humans surrender immediately or face complete destruction. The Nova Arbiters were broadcasting their usual speech about how humanity was a chaos that threatened the peaceful order of the galaxy. Jake remembered the last time he had heard those words. It was during the Battle of Proxima, where his teacher, Captain Roy Bennett, had flown his ship straight into a Crimson dreadnought to save 3 ships full of human families who were trying to escape. Roy had told Jake over the radio that someone had to make a stand even if it meant dying. Those words still rang in Jake's head every day. The Defiance was different from every other human ship that had been built before. Chief Engineer Lisa Hayes had spent 3 years building a fusion core that could power weapons and defenses that no human ship had ever carried. The armor could change and adapt when it was hit by enemy fire. The main weapon was something Lisa called the Harmony Disruptor, and she claimed it could interfere with both Crimson energy blasts and the quantum fields that the Nova Arbiters used to control space itself. Jake had never tested the new systems in real combat, but today he would find out if Lisa's genius was enough to give humanity a fighting chance. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations as both alien fleets moved closer to the colony below. Navigator Ben Phillips kept the ship steady while Communications Officer Kate Rodriguez listened to the desperate calls from the people trying to evacuate New Portland. The Crimson ships were massive things that looked like they had been carved from red crystal and powered by the fires of dying stars, their weapons charged with a sound that made human teeth ache even through the protection of ship hulls. The Nova Arbiters traveled in vessels that seemed to be made of pure golden light that shifted and changed shape as they moved through space like living beings made of energy. Jake had studied both enemies for years, and he knew their strengths and weaknesses better than any other human commander. The Crimson Dominion believed that overwhelming force and fear were the only ways to control other species. They had conquered hundreds of worlds by showing up with so many ships that resistance seemed impossible. The Nova Arbiters used their advanced technology and claims of moral superiority to make other species believe that fighting back was both hopeless and wrong. Both alien forces had one thing in common that Jake had noticed during his years of running and hiding. They had never fought each other directly. The Crimson Dominion and the Nova Arbiters had divided the galaxy between them long before humans had ever left Earth. They stayed in their own territories and left each other alone, while they crushed any species that tried to challenge either of them. Amy Carter reported that both fleets were now in weapons range and waiting for orders. The Crimson War Prince Zethkar was demanding that Jake come aboard his flagship to surrender in person as a show of respect for Crimson military traditions. The Nova Arbiters wanted the Defiance to stop all movement and prepare to be judged by their ancient laws. Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same determination that had kept humanity alive for 12 years of running and hiding. Dr. Sam Patterson was ready at his medical station to treat wounded crew members. Security Chief Dan Murphy had his team standing by to repel boarders or launch their own attacks. Every person on the bridge was ready to follow Jake's orders, even though they all knew the odds of survival were almost zero. The time for running was over. Jake had spent years watching human colonies burn while their defenders fled to fight another day. He had seen too many good people die while trying to evacuate civilians who should never have been forced to leave their homes. Roy Bennett had been right when he said that someone had to make a stand, even if it meant dying. Jake opened a communication channel to both alien fleets and spoke in a voice that carried across the bridge and out to every ship in the system. He told War Prince Zethkar that humans would not surrender, and they would not bow to Crimson military traditions. He told the Nova Arbiters that humanity rejected their judgment and their laws because no species had the right to decide if another species deserved to exist. Then Jake gave the order that would change everything. Instead of running away like every other human commander had done for 12 years, he ordered the Defiance to move forward directly between the two alien fleets. Lisa Hayes pushed the fusion core to full power while Ben Phillips set a course that would put them in the middle of both enemy formations. The crew worked with smooth efficiency as the ship accelerated toward the two most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Jake Morrison had decided that if humanity was going to die, it would die fighting, and maybe their sacrifice would inspire other humans to stop running and start fighting back. The warship warrior who feared no Crimson or Nova Arbiter was about to find out if courage and determination could overcome impossible odds. The bridge lights flickered as golden shapes began to form in the air around Jake and his crew. The Nova Arbiters did not need ships to travel short distances, because they were beings made of pure energy that could move through space and matter, like humans move through air. Their leader appeared as a swirling mass of bright light that hurt to look at directly and spoke, without using words, by putting thoughts directly into human minds. The being called itself the Prime Judgment, and its voice echoed inside Jake's head like the sound of distant thunder. It told him that humanity had committed the greatest crime possible by refusing to accept the wisdom of the Nova Arbiters who had maintained peace in the galaxy for thousands of years. The punishment for such defiance was complete removal from existence so that the chaos humans brought could never spread to other worlds. Jake felt his crew tense around him as more golden forms materialized throughout the ship, but he kept his voice steady as he spoke aloud. He told the Prime Judgment that humans had never asked for the Nova Arbiters to judge them, and they would not accept any punishment from beings who claimed to know what was best for species they had never tried to understand. At the same moment, the first crimson plasma bolts began hammering against the Defiance's shields. War Prince Zethkar had decided that talking was finished, and it was time to show these humans what happened when lesser species challenged the might of the Crimson Dominion. The red energy weapons hit like the fists of angry gods and made the entire ship shake with each impact. Amy Carter worked frantically at her weapons station, trying to target the dozens of Crimson fighters that swarmed around the Defiance like angry insects. The small ships moved in patterns that seemed random, but Jake knew they were following ancient Crimson battle tactics designed to confuse and overwhelm enemy defenses. Behind the fighters came the massive dreadnoughts, with weapons that could crack planets. Navigator Ben Phillips threw the ship into a spinning dive that should have been impossible for something as large as the Defiance, but the new engines that Lisa Hayes had designed could push the ship in directions that physics said should tear it apart. Communications Officer Kate Rodriguez was coordinating with the evacuation ships that were still trying to get civilians away from New Portland while staying in contact with other human forces scattered across the system. The Nova Arbiters began using their quantum manipulation abilities to try to stop the Defiance from moving, but Lisa had built the ship's systems to resist exactly this kind of attack. The Harmony Disruptor created interference fields that made it hard for the energy beings to maintain their solid forms while also disrupting the targeting systems on Crimson ships. Jake realized something important as he watched both alien forces struggle with tactics they had never faced before. The Crimson Dominion and Nova Arbiters had ruled the galaxy for so long that they had forgotten how to fight enemies who did not follow the rules they expected. Crimson warriors were used to crushing opponents with overwhelming firepower, while Nova Arbiters relied on their victims accepting that resistance was morally wrong. Dr. Sam Patterson reported from sickbay that several crew members had been injured when quantum energy from the Arbiters interfered with human brain functions, but he was managing to treat them with new medical techniques developed specifically for fighting energy-based beings. Security Chief Dan Murphy had his teams ready to repel any attempt by either alien force to board the ship, but he was also preparing boarding parties of his own. The battle was unlike anything that had ever happened in recorded galactic history. For the first time, the two greatest powers in the galaxy were fighting the same enemy at the same time, and their different attack methods were interfering with each other. Crimson plasma weapons created electromagnetic fields that disrupted Nova Arbiter quantum manipulation, while Arbiter Energy fields made it impossible for Crimson ships to maintain accurate targeting. Jake ordered Lisa to begin charging the Harmony Disruptor. For a full power pulse that would hit both enemy fleets simultaneously, the chief engineer warned him that using the weapon at maximum power might overload the fusion core and destroy the ship, but Jake knew this was their only chance to prove that humans could fight back against impossible odds. The Defiance continued its wild flight between the two alien fleets while taking damage from both sides. The adaptive armor was working better than Lisa had hoped and was actually learning from each hit to become more resistant to similar attacks. The ship was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches, but the crew worked together with the kind of determination that had kept humanity alive during 12 years of running and hiding. Kate Rodriguez picked up communications from other human ships in the system, and Jake heard something in the voices of his fellow commanders that he had not heard for years. Instead of fear and desperation, they were talking about fighting back and asking for orders to join the battle. The sight of one human ship charging directly at both alien fleets was inspiring other humans to stop running and start shooting. The prime judgment spoke again inside Jake's mind, and there was something like surprise in its voice as it admitted that humans were not behaving according to any pattern in the Nova Arbiter databases. War Prince Zethkar was broadcasting on Crimson military frequencies and demanding to know how an inferior species had weapons that could interfere with Dominion technology. Jake smiled as he gave Lisa the order to fire the Harmony Disruptor at full power. The weapon sent out a pulse of energy that was tuned to disrupt both quantum fields and plasma containment systems. For a few seconds, both alien fleets found themselves unable to use their most powerful weapons, while the humans around New Portland began their own attacks. The Warship warrior, who feared no enemy, had just taught the galaxy's two greatest powers that humans would never again accept subjugation without a fight that would cost their enemies more than they could afford to pay. The Defiance limped away from the battle zone with smoke pouring from 3 different sections and sparks flying from damaged control panels across the bridge. Jake Morrison stood steady despite the ship shaking around him as Lisa Hayes worked to keep the fusion core stable after the massive energy discharge from the Harmony Disruptor. The weapon had worked better than anyone had hoped, but it had also pushed their ship to the very edge of destruction. Amy Carter was examining the data they had captured from both alien fleets during the fight, and what she found made her call Jake over to her station immediately. The Crimson ships had been broadcasting tactical information to each other, using quantum encryption that the Defiance's computers had managed to break during the chaos of battle. Hidden in those communications were details about something much bigger than anyone had imagined. The files showed that the Crimson Dominion and Nova Arbiters had not always avoided fighting each other. Thousands of years ago, they had been locked in a war that nearly destroyed both civilizations and most of the galaxy along with them. They had agreed to divide space between them and never directly challenge each other again because they both understood that another war between them would end all life in the galaxy. Jake realized that humanity had accidentally become the first threat to this ancient balance of power. The Crimson Dominion saw humans as weak prey that should be easy to crush, but their repeated failures to defeat human resistance was making them look weak to other species under their control. The Nova Arbiters viewed human unpredictability as a chaos that could spread to other species and make them question Arbiter authority. Dr. Helen Walsh had been studying alien psychology for years, and she explained to Jake that both enemy factions were driven by fear disguised as strength. The Crimson Warriors needed to prove their superiority through conquest, because their entire society was built on the idea that might made right. The Nova Arbiters needed other species to accept their judgment because they believed that cosmic order could only exist if everyone followed the same rules. Jake saw an opportunity that no human commander had ever noticed before. Both alien factions were trapped by their own nature and their ancient agreement with each other. If he could force them to break that agreement, then they would have to choose between maintaining their balance of power or destroying the humans who threatened it. Ben Phillips had managed to get the ship's navigation systems working again, and he reported that both alien fleets were regrouping but staying carefully separated from each other. The battle had ended in what both sides would call a draw, but Jake knew that neither faction could afford to let humans escape after proving they could fight back. Successfully, Kate Rodriguez was monitoring communications across human space, and the news she brought made Jake's heart race with excitement. The battle at New Portland was being talked about on every human world and ship in the galaxy. For the first time in 12 years, humans were hearing about one of their own ships attacking both alien enemies at the same time and surviving to tell about it. Jake made a decision that would have seemed insane to any other human commander, but he had learned that sometimes the most dangerous move was also the smartest one. He ordered Kate to send messages to both War Prince Zethkar and the Prime Judgment at the same time, using different approaches that would appeal to what each enemy valued most. To the Crimson Prince, he sent a formal challenge according to ancient Dominion honor codes that Lisa had found in the captured data files. Jake claimed that Zethkar had shown weakness by failing to destroy a single human ship and challenged him to single combat between champions to restore Crimson honor. The message was carefully written to suggest that other Crimson commanders would question Zethkar's fitness to lead if he refused. To the Nova Arbiters, Jake sent a request for formal arbitration, using their own cosmic laws that required them to hear arguments from both sides before passing final judgment. He argued that humanity had never been given a fair trial according to Arbiter legal traditions and that their condemnation was therefore invalid under the very rules the Arbiters claimed to follow. The responses came back faster than Jake had expected, and both were exactly what he had hoped for. War Prince Zethkar was furious that a member of what he called a slave species had dared to question Crimson honor, and he began assembling the largest battle fleet in Dominion history to crush this insult. The Prime Judgment was bound by laws older than most civilizations, and admitted that Jake's request for arbitration was technically valid under cosmic legal codes. What neither alien faction realized was that Jake had no intention of actually participating in either the single combat or the arbitration hearing. His real plan was much more dangerous and would require perfect timing to work. He ordered his crew to begin preparing for a transmission that would be broadcast to every human ship and colony in the galaxy at the same time. Dr. Sam Patterson was treating the crew members who had been injured during the battle, but he reported that morale was higher than it had been in years. Security Chief Dan Murphy had teams working around the clock to repair battle damage while also studying captured alien technology that might give them new advantages in future fights. Lisa Hayes came to the bridge with news that the Harmony Disruptor could be modified to work on a much larger scale if they were willing to sacrifice the ship to power it. Jake told her to begin the modifications because he had a feeling they would need every advantage they could get for what was coming next. The message Jake was preparing would change everything. Instead of running or hiding or trying to negotiate with their enemies, humanity would do something that no species had ever done before. They would declare war on both the Crimson Dominion and Nova Arbiters at the same time and fight for their freedom regardless of the cost. As the Defiance drifted through space making repairs, Jake looked out at the stars and thought about Roy Bennett's words about someone needing to make a stand. The warship warrior who feared no enemy was about to find out if the rest of humanity was ready to stop running and start fighting for their right to exist among the stars. Jake's message spread across human space like fire jumping from tree to tree in a dry forest. Within days of his broadcast, every human colony that had been hiding and running for 12 years began fighting back against their alien oppressors. Captain Maria Santos led a successful attack on Kepler, station that had been under Crimson control for 5 years, while Commander Paul Jackson managed to free 3 mining worlds from Nova Arbiter rule using the tactical information that Jake had shared. The alien response was swift and terrible. War Prince Zethkar assembled the largest Crimson Armada that had ever been seen, with over 2,000 ships ranging from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts that could destroy entire cities with single shots. The Nova Arbiters deployed their enforcement fleets for the first time in 1,000 years, sending golden vessels filled with energy beings who could manipulate matter itself to crush any resistance. Both alien armies headed straight for Earth because they knew that destroying humanity's homeworld would end the rebellion before it could spread to other species in the galaxy. Jake found himself leading a hastily assembled fleet of human ships toward the solar system, knowing that this would be the last battle that humanity would ever fight. Either they would win their freedom or they would die fighting for it. The space around Earth filled with ships as both alien fleets arrived at almost the same time. The Crimson forces took position near Mars while the Nova Arbiters gathered near Jupiter, and for a few hours there was a strange calm as three different armies prepared for the biggest space battle in galactic history. Jake could feel the tension building as millions of beings waited to see which force would strike first. Lisa Hayes had finished modifying the Harmony disruptor and warned Jake that using it at the new power level would definitely destroy the Defiance but might also disable every ship within a light minute of their position. Dr. Sam Patterson had his medical teams ready for casualties that would probably include most of the crew, while Ben Phillips calculated flight paths that would put them in the center of both enemy formations when the weapon fired. The battle began when a Crimson patrol ship fired on a Nova Arbiter scout vessel that had moved too close to the Martian orbital zone. War Prince Zethkar claimed the Arbiters were violating the ancient territorial agreements, while the Prime Judgment declared that Crimson aggression was a violation of cosmic law. Within minutes, both alien fleets were shooting at each other as well as at the human defenders. Jake had hoped for exactly this moment when the two alien powers would finally break their ancient peace treaty and fight each other directly. He ordered all human ships to attack both enemy fleets while they were distracted by their own conflict. Amy Carter targeted Crimson dreadnoughts with missiles, while Kate Rodriguez coordinated attacks with human ships throughout the solar system. The three-way battle that followed was unlike anything that had ever happened in known history. Crimson plasma weapons tore through both human and Arbiter ships, while Nova Arbiter quantum manipulation fields crushed Crimson fighters and disabled human vessels. Human ships darted between the two alien fleets using hit-and-run tactics that kept their enemies confused about where the next attack would come from. The Defiance took massive damage as it flew through the center of the battle zone, but Jake's crew worked with desperate efficiency to keep fighting. Security Chief Dan Murphy led boarding parties that captured alien technology, while his teams repelled enemy soldiers who tried to take control of human ships. Communications across the solar system crackled with reports of victories and defeats as the battle spread to every planet, and Moon Dr. Helen Walsh monitored alien communications and reported that both enemy fleets were starting to focus more on fighting each other than on destroying human forces. The ancient hatred between Crimson Dominion and Nova Arbiters was stronger than their desire to crush human resistance, and Jake realized this was humanity's best chance to strike a decisive blow. Earth's orbital defense platforms joined the battle along with every human ship that could still fly and fight. The planet's population watched from underground shelters as the sky filled with explosions and energy beams that lit up the night brighter than the sun. Children who had never seen their home world, free from alien control, watched their parents and older siblings fight for the right to live without fear. The turning point came when several Nova Arbiter factions decided that the Crimson Dominion posed a greater threat to galactic order than humanity ever could. These Arbiters began actively targeting Crimson ships while leaving human vessels alone in an attempt to restore what they saw as proper cosmic balance. Some Crimson commanders responded by forming temporary alliances with human captains to fight against their ancient energy-based enemies. Jake saw his chance and ordered Lisa to fire the modified Harmony disruptor at maximum power while the Defiance was positioned between the largest concentrations of both alien fleets. The weapon released more energy than a small star and created interference fields that disabled every ship within millions of kilometers. The blast was so powerful that it could be seen from the outer planets as both alien armadas found their most advanced weapons suddenly useless. The silence that followed the massive energy discharge, Jake broadcast one final message to every ship in the solar system. He told both alien factions that humanity would never again accept subjugation from any force in the galaxy, and that Earth would be defended by humans who would rather die free than live as slaves. The message was heard by representatives of dozens of other species who had been secretly watching the battle to see if humans could actually stand up to their oppressors. As the Defiance drifted powerless through space, Jake looked around at his crew and saw that they had accomplished something that would change the galaxy forever. The warship warrior who feared no enemy had broken the ancient balance of power and proven that even the mightiest civilizations could be challenged by beings who refused to surrender their freedom. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, Jake Morrison stood on the rebuilt bridge of the Defiance watching ships from 3 different species working together to construct a new space station in orbit around humanity's homeworld. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted, and Jake found himself at the center of transformations that reached every corner of known space. The ancient balance between the Crimson Dominion and Nova Arbiters lay in ruins after their first direct war in thousands of years had left both civilizations severely weakened and divided. Many Crimson clans had broken away from War Prince Zethkar's leadership after seeing human courage in battle and deciding that a species willing to fight impossible odds deserved respect rather than conquest. Progressive Nova Arbiter factions had formed a new group, calling itself the Harmony Collective, that worked with human philosophers to develop laws that celebrated diversity instead of demanding conformity. Jake had been promoted to admiral and given command of humanity's first diplomatic fleet, but he sometimes missed the simple clarity of his old job when enemies were obvious and victory meant survival. Now he spent his days negotiating with alien ambassadors and trying to build peaceful relationships with species that had been shooting at each other for longer than human civilization had existed. The Crimson Warriors who had chosen to ally with humanity brought gifts of advanced weapon technology and star maps showing unexplored regions beyond the old territorial boundaries. Their leader was a young commander named Battlesinger Kethmar, who had fought against the Defiance during the first battle at New Portland and had been so impressed by human tactics that she had requested permission to serve alongside Jake's fleet. She told him that Crimson culture valued strength above all else, and humans had proven their strength by refusing to surrender even when facing certain death. The Nova Arbiters who joined the new alliance were more difficult to understand because they communicated through energy patterns that human minds could barely comprehend. The being that called itself New Resonance had been part of the enforcement fleet that attacked Earth, but had changed its views after witnessing how human creativity and chaos could produce unexpected solutions to ancient problems. It worked with Dr. Helen Walsh to translate concepts between human and arbiter thinking that had never been successfully shared before. Not everyone accepted the new order that was emerging from the wreckage of the old galaxy. Hardline Crimson factions still loyal to War Prince Zethkar continued to attack human colonies, while demanding that all species submit to Dominion rule. Conservative Nova Arbiters insisted that human unpredictability was still a threat to cosmic order and sent assassination squads to eliminate human leaders who promoted independence for other species. Jake found himself fighting a different kind of war against enemies who used terrorism and sabotage instead of open battle. His new responsibilities included protecting alien diplomats who wanted to join the growing alliance, as well as hunting down fanatics from both old empires who would rather see the galaxy burn than accept that their ancient way of doing things was finished forever. Amy Carter had been promoted to captain of her own ship and was leading exploration missions to sectors that had been closed to independent travel for millennia. Communications Officer Kate Rodriguez had become humanity's chief translator, working with teams of linguists to establish communication protocols with dozens of species that were emerging from hiding. Now that the old powers could no longer threaten them, Ben Phillips commanded a squadron of fast ships that carried messages between the scattered human colonies and their new allies. Lisa Hayes was working with Crimson engineers and Nova Arbiter energy specialists to develop technologies that combined the best ideas from all three civilizations. The new fusion cores she designed could power ships large enough to carry entire cities while using weapon systems that were effective against any known threat. Dr. Sam Patterson had established medical exchanges that allowed human doctors to learn alien healing techniques while teaching other species about human resilience and recovery methods. The First Galactic Assembly met on a neutral space station built specifically for bringing together representatives from every species that wanted to participate in writing new laws for interstellar civilization. Jake gave the opening speech to delegates from over 40 different worlds and told them that the future belonged to beings who could work together despite their differences, rather than to those who demanded that everyone think and act the same way. The assembly sessions were chaotic and often frustrating as species with completely different biology and psychology tried to find common ground for peaceful coexistence. Some aliens breathed methane, while others required high radiation environments that would kill most carbon-based life forms within minutes. Crimson warriors wanted laws that rewarded strength and courage, while Arbiter philosophers insisted on regulations that promoted harmony and order. Jake learned that diplomacy was harder than warfare because enemies could be defeated, but allies had to be convinced. Every agreement required compromise from groups that had spent centuries believing their way was the only correct approach to civilization. Progress was measured in small steps rather than decisive victories, but each successful negotiation brought the galaxy closer to a future where conflicts could be resolved through discussion rather than destruction. The final breakthrough came when Jake proposed that the new galactic government should be based on voluntary cooperation rather than enforced compliance. Species could choose which laws to follow as long as they did not interfere with other beings who made different choices. This concept was revolutionary to both Crimson and Arbiter thinking, but it appealed to smaller species that had been crushed under the old system of imposed unity. As the Defiance prepared to depart for humanity's next mission, Jake stood in his quarters looking at a photograph of Captain Roy Bennett, who had taught him that sometimes the greatest victory came from refusing to give up even when winning seemed impossible. The old commander would have been proud to see that his sacrifice had inspired changes that reached across the entire galaxy. The final scene showed human ships flying alongside former enemies toward uncharted space where new worlds and new challenges waited for explorers who had earned their place among the stars through courage and determination. Jake Morrison had transformed from a desperate defender into a builder of bridges between species that had once seemed destined to destroy each other. The warship warrior who feared no enemy had discovered that the greatest battles were won not through superior firepower, but through the much harder work of teaching former enemies to become friends.